All right, good evening, everyone out there on social media, on Facebook, at the CCPS Facebook page, joining us here for another very important conversation that we continue to have in the Chesterfield School District. This is the third conversation. In the past, we've already heard from students, some very intelligent students at that, who offered their thoughts on what they would like to see change in CCPS. And then our initial conversation really set the table for the framework of this conversation that continues today. Today, we are building on the future of CCPS and getting more teachers of color in the school district. So this is a conversation that happens across the country. There are a lot of school districts out there. Some struggle more than others with hiring teachers of color to really be reflective of the demographic and the students that they serve. So currently, CCPS is what's called a minority majority school district with 14.3% of the teaching staff identifying as someone of color and 22.8% of our school administrators being someone of color as well. So conversations focusing on getting more teachers of color into the education profession is something that is ongoing, but the question here is, the problem rather, is that what if there's a bias established in the hiring practices? Could the answers to that be ongoing and present itself as a challenge as they develop strategies to recruit teachers to come to CCPS? And that's going to be the focal point of our conversation here today. So thank you everyone for joining us, and I'm going to introduce everyone here on the panel. We have Dr. Andrew Dyer. So did I pronounce that correctly? Dare, PhD, Dean and Professor at the School of Education at Virginia Commonwealth University. Thank you so much for joining us. We have Dr. Bruce Philman, the principal at Henning Elementary School. We also have Mrs. Kim Hugh, the Director of Human Resources at CCPS. Dr. Maya Johnson, the Coordinator of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. Mrs. Jessica Monroe, a teacher at Bellwood Elementary School. We also have Mrs. Noriko Wade, who's a parent at CCPS. And last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Tinkani White, Director of School Improvement at CCPS. Thank you guys so much for joining us. And we're going to jump right into the conversation because we have a lot to get to. Again, all these questions submitted by you, the viewer at home. So we want to make sure to get to as many of these as possible. And each of these questions, just to start, will be directed towards a specific person. And then it's really open to anyone who wants to chime in. We really want to hear from as many of you as possible. All right, Doctor, we'll start with a quick icebreaker. Since we are talking about teachers tonight, I would love for everyone to finish the following sentence to start here. And it says, the best teacher I ever had, and I'll go first, was Mr. Terrence. He was my science teacher in 7th grade. And I made a lot of mistakes leading up to 7th grade, but Mr. Terrence somehow found a way to kind of speak to me, right? And science wasn't even a subject I really enjoyed, but I enjoyed going to his class because I felt like he just understood me. And he's not a black man. He was a white man that saw something in me, and he was just, there for me when I needed him. And he made science fun, and that's not something I typically enjoy. So there's power in having the right teacher on board. And one word I would use to describe him is very engaging with his students. He always found a way to engage with his students, no matter who you are, where your ability lies. He always made sure he got you across the finish line. So I'm going to present that same question here to everyone. We're going to start down there with you, Bruce, if you can. So the best teacher I ever had was, and then one word to describe that teacher.
Absolutely. So the best teacher I ever had was Mr. Judd. He was my strings teacher when I was in elementary school and really set my course for even going to college. One word that I would describe him would be energetic.
So for me, my best teacher was Mrs. Hilly, and she was an English teacher, and I cannot remember if it was 10th, 11th, or 12th grade, but I know I had her for 2 different English classes. And what I really liked about her, and what I remember, is just how caring she was. So you wanted to do good because she was so caring, and you didn't want to disappoint her. And so that was something that I remember the most about her.
The best teacher I ever had was Randall Hall, and he was a band instructor. I played the clarinet, and I would describe him as demanding, but in a kind and patient way.
So the best teacher that I ever had, her name is Mrs. Scott, and she was my second grade teacher. And one word I would use to describe her is caring. I remember, and this has stayed with me even into adulthood, every day before we began with any instruction, she called us over to her one by one to ask about our evening and to ask just how we're doing. And every day before we left to go home, she called us over to her one by one to ask about our day and to tell us that she loves us. So that's Mrs. Scott.
The best teacher I had was Mrs. Harbor. She was my elementary school teacher, and I would say that she was successful, and I will always remember her and be thankful for her because she wanted to make sure that students like me and who look like me were successful as well, and she gave us every opportunity for us to do that.
For me, it would be Mr. Ford. He was a 10th grade world history teacher and started my love for history because he was engaging and he made the subject relatable to what we were doing from day to day. And that really stood with me because he made it fun and entertaining.
For me, I would go with, I had two, but I'm going to stick with one and follow the directions. I have Mrs. Marquardt, who was my ESL teacher in 8th grade. Every other teacher recommended me for lower level classes going into high school. And Mrs. Marquardt went to my counselor and made her change my course recommendations to upper level coursework. So without her, I probably would not have made it to college because in New York, the course track that the rest of my teachers put me on would not have had me to go to college.
All good teachers, and you can see the impact here just by looking at the panel that we've assembled based upon where they are. So teachers have a huge impact. So let's jump into the questions here. This is for Dr. White and Dr. Johnson. Can you guys speak specifically about the importance and impact that teachers of color have inside of the classroom, specifically centering around students' success, and what do you think is important to these students on a day-to-day?
You want me to? All right. Absolutely. And just before getting into that answer, I just want to express sincere appreciation for everyone who's had a hand and involvement in keeping this platform going and keeping these conversations going because it started with one and we see the evolution. It is continuing and it's allowing different perspectives to be brought to the table and uplifting many different voices. So I just want to express appreciation for everyone who's had a hand, the departments, our students, faculty, staff, and everyone who is watching. To get to the question, I want to start by noting that it is important to have all teachers representative of all backgrounds, but it's not, the impact is not just for students of color. Teachers of color impact all students of color as well as our white students. And with educational outcomes, the impact is in ways that can and cannot be quantified. So when we speak about we want to quantify educational outcomes, we can speak to the impact that it has on attendance, on grades or lowering discipline incidents, but also it's impacting in ways that cannot be quantified. So you think about the psychological benefits of a child who goes in, let's say a student of color, and they're sitting and they say, wow, look at my teacher who looks like me. But it's just as important for a white student to be sitting and be instructed and see, not all of my educators look like me, and learn from that, right? And we speak about, so as educators, we speak about cultural competency and multicultural awareness and cultural sensitivity. That should not just start when we get to a place where we are preparing to enter the workforce. We need to expose our youth to that now and at this time. We cannot write experiences for our students, for our youth, for our kids that are not inclusive. We do a huge disservice to them if we are not providing engaging ways for racial diversity as well as cultural diversity. And so specifically speaking to students of color, there's a whole lot of research around it, but I want to specifically note Johns Hopkins research because they looked at some students of color and have found that the trajectory for some students of color was completely altered when they had at least one teacher of color by the time they were in third grade. Just one. Being exposed to just one teacher of color by the time they entered third grade completely changed their trajectory of education and impacted graduation. So I won't hog all the time, Dr. White.
No, everything that Dr. Johnson said is definitely in the research, including aspirations to attend college, if that's what they want to do, improved graduation rates, improved reading and math test scores, and that's for all students. Students of color and white students report having positive perceptions of teachers of color, so they're really well received by students from all sides. One thing that I would add is that having a diverse population of teachers in a school helps you keep other teachers of color. So if you are in a school and you're the only teacher of color, sometimes the feelings of isolation, frustration, fatigue, and all of those things are mitigated when there are other teachers of color in that school with you as well. So, and just to kind of underscore what Dr. Johnson said, I think the way that we combat racism is for all kids to see all people of all races in all positions. So whether it's the teacher or our wonderful custodians or cafeteria, to see those, that anybody who looks like me can be anything and become anything that I would ever aspire to.
And it sounds like from the research you guys are referencing, the younger they start to see those images, the better the outcomes, right? And then let's get to Mrs. Monroe, a teacher as well. What has been your experiences working at Bellwood?
Well, as an educator, it's been kind of wild and crazy. I've experienced racism firsthand. I've had students as young as second grade and parents who've called me racial slurs. I've had students who told me that, you know, I was beneath them, that I was a second-class citizen and they were first-class. And I'm an elementary educator, so I know that's coming directly from home. But like you said, I was given the opportunity to become their safe person. I'm your teacher. You have to come, you don't speak to me when you have a problem. And they learn that all of the negative things that they learned at home weren't true. We formed meaningful relationships. And I'm actually truly grateful for that because I feel like I was able to make a difference in their life and maybe change the way that they'll go on to treat other people and other individuals of minorities. So, but I've also been given the opportunity to work with young Black students, and I'm the one who can say that you're capable of doing so much more. And I'm able to be that change for them and that catalyst to let them know that academically you can do well and you should. So I've really enjoyed it, and I've been grateful for all of the experiences.
Did you feel like you were, sorry, I follow up sometimes. Did you feel like you were prepared for that initial conversation where you felt, well, where a student, a white student, or what student that was not Black or color, right? You said that someone. So if a student said to you that you were beneath them, did you feel prepared for that conversation, or is that something you learned in
I
school?
was
Like,
ready.
how do you do that for a kid that young?
Well, and I would say I have learned that I have a strength inside me that I really didn't know. But I was definitely prepared. I've had conversations like that with adults, but you know, you got to kind of spin it because it's someone younger than you. But I just had to explain to them, as you can see, I'm the teacher, I'm the authority figure. I've gone to college. I'm as smart as your parent. You know, I'm successful as well. It isn't always a direct conversation. It's more so in, okay, you said that. My actions will speak louder than my words. I can show you better than I can tell you. You still have to work with me. I still have to work with you, so we make the best of the situation. But as I said, the more that I got to work with them and the more we got to know each other, they softened up. Their parents may not have liked me and made it very clear, but your child did. So,
Good for you. Good for you. I like that. And this is a great segue to Mrs. Wade, who is a parent. So what would you like to say about your experiences with teachers in CCPS?
As a parent, my experience has been a good experience. My kids are in elementary and in middle school. However, if I think about as a student, from your earlier question, right, I had 3 teachers of color in through first or kindergarten through 12th grade, plus when I think about college, and I can remember those three teachers' names. I don't remember all of my teachers, right? But those three kind of stand up to me. And when I have conversations with my children, they are excited when they find out that there's going to be a teacher of color. Like, it becomes a relational thing, right? Someone who might get you, who understands you. We had an incident in the past year or two where the incident was, and I didn't know the term for it until maybe the last 12 months, was a bit of microaggressions from a white teacher towards one of my kids who, they look mixed, right? We're black and Asian. And my child, who doesn't complain about things, mentioned that something was wrong, which meant something was wrong. And to kind of the naked eye, it wasn't anything where someone needed to go get fired. They didn't say something out the way. But this microaggression made my child feel some kind of way. And I needed to respect that and identify that. And then I, as a parent, needed to go to the school and have a civil conversation with the teacher, because the teacher didn't realize that that's how it came across. And there was a bit of education we had to do there. But knowing that our kids at a young age, because we're having these conversations in our home, don't be as loud as some of the other kids. You've got to be careful. It's because they're going to experience some of those microaggressions, and we're preparing our children kind of differently. But we also aren't necessarily, and I don't know if the educators are having this conversation, but we're not preparing our educators for it. They don't know what conversations we're having in our homes, and they don't know the impact of their words, their actions, even though not overt, might be having on our kids, which is really important.
All right, we have a question here for Dr. Philman. Tonight we're focusing on why it's important for our students to have teachers who look like them, but as we've already established here, just based on some of the input from some of the people here on our panel, that the benefits go way beyond just students of color. So can you just speak to those benefits and your experiences as an educator and leader?
Sure. So I'm a proud principal of Henning Elementary School, and I love to talk about the diversity at our school. We are a school that is about 50% black, about 30% Hispanic, and the remainder primarily being white, which is pretty close to the Richmond metro area and some of the areas around. So we're kind of that microcosm of what the Richmond metro area is. And because of that, we get to enjoy the diversity and all that it brings to our school. So as it's been talked about before, certainly having a teacher of the same color or the same race as you are has an impact. There's really no doubt about that. The research is pretty clear on that. But I think for all students, we talked before that we said that a good teacher educates all students and has an impact. And when you can pull in from a good teacher, regardless of what color they are, you grow, a student grows. But even beyond that, when you think about we talked about how we reduce dropout rate and we increase standardized scores for children of color if they have a teacher by third grade, I believe it was you said. And I know some research says third, fourth, and fifth. We increase or decrease their dropout rate, some studies show, by more than 40%. And that benefit to society as a whole, when you think about the cost benefit of increased earnings and decreased costs on other sides, it's just a benefit for everyone. But in the school, I also like to think at it from the student perspective. And there's a quote that talks about, you don't fear the people you know. And if you're able to really relate to people and people that are different than you, then you don't have that fear of them. And if we can teach that early, and we can teach our children not to fear others just because they're different, it benefits everyone and allows us to grow from everyone. It allows us to problem solve together and to be innovative and creative and come at problems that we're facing now that are huge from various lenses. So I think there's a lot of benefit. I think there's benefits on that global level that I talked about being economic benefits, but there's also just benefits to being human and to knowing one another and to growing from that.
I think that really speaks to what you were talking about, right? That common ground, that commonality. The more you interact with a student like that on a day-to-day basis, it really can break down any barrier that may be established at home in some cases. So that really is a good piece. And Dr. Johnson, so the research, like we've been talking about, certainly supports the success of having a diverse faculty and staff. You see this personally through multiple perspectives, right? I understand you're a student yourself, an educator, a counselor, and now your current role as the coordinator of the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. In discussing this topic this evening, what are your thoughts on those critical components, and what does, if you can expound upon the research a little bit more too as well?
So that's a great question, and there are many critical components, but I just want to take a step back and just kind of relate it to us as individuals personally or professionally. So in any part of our life, whether it be personally or professionally, when we are drawn towards something, there is an attraction, right? However that may look, personally or professionally. So when we think about ourselves as an educational system, because we have to think of ourselves as a system, what does our system say to teachers of color, to staff of color? Does our system say you are valued? Does our system say you are supported? Does our system say once we get you in, we are going to grab a hold of you and we are going to coach you? And so for our teachers of color, I mean, again, we have to think system, and for, we're speaking of Chesterfield County right now, so let's just think about everywhere. When teachers of color walk into district offices, when they walk into school buildings, when they walk into meetings, is there a presence of you are respected, you are connected, you are valued, right? Not just I'm inviting you to the meeting, sit in the meeting, but you're invited to the meeting and your contributions are valued and what you are contributing to the discussion is valued. And I think for us as an educational system to always be reflective in that manner is appropriate, because we always have to ask ourselves, what tone do we set? Do we set a tone of inclusive practices, right? And I have to go back to a quote that Leah Walker said, our VDOE's coordinator of equity, because she spoke about systems that, is your system designed for those you serve to survive or thrive? And they are different, right? So is it a system for teachers of color to thrive? You are here and you are thriving professionally, right? Or is it just you're here, now you're on your own to survive, right? And that those are two different concepts and very important. So again, we have to look at ourselves and say, okay, when a teacher of color walks into our space, number one, what do they see? Do they see, and as Dr. White spoke to, because we also have to realize some of the things that teachers of color go through, as Dr. White spoke to, with the feeling of isolation, and we have to recognize that. That can't just be pushed aside. And just to say, we have teachers of color, now that is a check, check the box, check, that's it. It can't be like that. And so, Dr. White, you hit the nail on the head, of course, as you always do, but speaking about that in that manner. And research, and I forgot who said it, shows to go in, it can't just be when teachers enter, when they walk into the door on the first day of the job where we're grabbing a hold of them. It has to be way before that, and partnering with teacher prep programs and partnering with higher education programs who enroll students from a diverse background, and really mentoring and coaching, right? And not just saying you're paired with a mentor and the teacher receives a text and says, how are you doing? Hope all is well. While those are kind words, that's good. We need, there needs to be more. That can't just be it. I don't know if anyone else wants to chime in.
Can I make a comment? And can I just also say that I feel like Black educators need to also be given the opportunity to teach gifted classes and courses, because in my experience as a student in Chesterfield County, when I was in AP classes and honors classes, I didn't have a single Black teacher. And it really affected me wanting to even be there and take the course. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed. And also the committees in schools, they need to be reflective of the demographic that, they serve. So I do feel like that's very important as well.
As a parent, the thing that I'll piggyback on is our kids pick up on it, whether you know that or not. They're not talking to teachers or even coming home unless we're asking questions, but they're picking up if you have only a limited number of teachers of color and they're also being treated a certain kind of way, or that they're struggling and no one's helping them. And that's sending a message to our kids as well about, are they going to be inspired to want to be a teacher or anybody in a profession where you're still the minority? So that's something else we must consider when we're talking about helping make, I love the thrive and survive. It was something I'd written down myself. When we're thinking about helping our teachers thrive versus survive, especially our minority teachers, it's that same concept that we then spill over to our children, right? Are we helping all of our children thrive versus survive? Because when they feel like they're the only or they're getting singled out, they're just trying to get by from class to class, and that's not what we want for any of our children.
I really, sorry, I was getting the mic to work. I really want to highlight the point that it does start way earlier than the day we get them in school. I wanted to be a dentist because I like my dentist. So I want to be a teacher because a teacher made a difference in my life, or they wanted they made me feel good about being in school. So how do we make sure that we are cultivating a teaching profession, especially for our students of color who would want to go into something, into a profession, into this profession? The reason kids, they're not going in it because they may not have had the best school experience. They may not have had the best relationships with teachers and the best, that felt valued in a school. So in order for us to build our workforce down the line, we need to start now and really making sure that they're seeing other people who look like them in the workforce.
Again, a great segue over here to Dr. Dare. You're the dean at the College of Education at VCU. So can you answer that for us? What are your classrooms looking like? What is the enrollment looking there as far as students of color going into the profession?
So I'll say that I think the answer and the three additional comments really spoke to that question. There's a broader systemic challenge, and I'll probably focus more on kind of what's happening in K-12. But one of the challenges we have in higher ed, where there needs to be some deep critical reflection in colleges and schools of education, is why was education one of the only degrees that Black people could get prior to segregation, but our colleges and schools of education are sometimes the least diverse in a university? Like, we have to really dig deep. Now, I think the answer is out there. But so our colleges and schools of education don't necessarily reflect that demographic, and there's some of the same issues that are happening in K-12 happens in higher education, why we don't get enough folks who then transition into master's programs, doctoral programs, and then get academic positions. That could be a whole other panel. In terms of the, what's happening in K-12, we've seen a decline nationally, right, in the number of folks going into teaching, but that decline is greater in Virginia, and so we do need to pay attention to that. There is a decline in even in the number of teachers of color going into the profession. But going to what Dr. White said, and I'll reference Rodney Robinson, who I just think was an outstanding National Teacher of the Year. The teaching profession is arguably the only profession where there is a 12-year on-the-job observation. And so if that should be the profession done right, that all students are running to. So we have to ask ourselves, again, we've got to ask these critically reflective questions. Why aren't they going into education? And I think Dr. White provided an important part of that answer. For those of you all who are familiar with the student-run Instagram Black @ read that. I mean, you read that and it's quite compelling, why students aren't going into education. Now, on the other side of it, in terms of preparing educators, we have loving, compassionate, skilled individuals going into the profession. However, we also know that we're living in a society that is more segregated now than it has been for 40 years. So people don't have those authentic experiences. You mentioned you don't fear those who you know. People aren't having those authentic experiences with folks different from them. We know we live in a society that is really built on white supremacy and it permeates through all aspects. Those folks go into a teacher prep program, there is no requirement for culturally responsive practice pedagogy. There's no requirement for critical reflection on implicit bias. There's a requirement now for CPR and IED training. And I always say there are more incidences of micro and macro racial aggressions than cardiovascular events, but we have CPR and IED training required. We don't have culturally responsive practice pedagogy. We don't have implicit bias. And so and we can talk about history. Hopefully that will change. I'm on the African American History and Education Commission, and I think there'll be some positive recommendations there, but folks aren't learning about history. So we have to change what we're doing in teacher prep programs. The accrediting bodies have to change. And I think the state regulations in the requirements to prepare educators need to change so that we can now prepare educators to ensure that all students have a high quality education and all students have a positive experience.
Where do I go from there? There's so much to address in that, because I think what I'm hearing you say is that ultimately that provides this cycle, right? If we are not having the interactions when kids are young, they're not going into the profession, the classrooms on the collegiate level to then become educators are predominantly white. Those people, those individuals go back into the school system, become educators, and may lack that same training about cultural diversity that then goes back into the system, and here we are again, right? So is that pretty much what we're all in agreement with? Wow. So let's kind of go one step further, if you don't mind. So CCPS has worked with VCU, I understand, through the Richmond Teachers in Residency program. Can you share a little bit of what that program looks like? What is the work you guys are trying to do and potentially even undo?
So we're incredibly proud of that program. We've prepared over 220 teachers. We're actually this year we're celebrating our 10-year anniversary for the RTR program, and we've kind of shifted the name from the Richmond Teacher Residency to RTR since we're working in Chesterfield and Petersburg and other school divisions. And that program is really built on a medical model, so to speak, where you'd have residents, med students who have a residency year where they're working in the field. So in those residency programs, those teacher candidates are in the schools, and we're working primarily with urban high needs schools. They're working in the schools while they're receiving their training. And it's a 4-year commitment. So they have 1 year, that's their residency year, and then they have 3 years. They have a three years that they then spend in the school. When they're finished with those 3 years, we know that we have maybe about a 5 to 7% attrition rate. So that's actually pretty good with folks who might leave for other careers or health reasons. We do see a lot of folks who end up getting promoted into administrative positions, but we know the retention rate is much better in those urban high need schools than students who come from traditional programs. And the programs have, we've had enough of a number to know that we also see some positive relationships with our residents and students' SOL scores. So it's a strong program. Chesterfield is a strong partner with us, and we're also working with some other school divisions. And it's part of a national model. So there are other residency programs across the country, and we're funded through federal, state, and local dollars.
Sure, yeah. So in Chesterfield, we are in our third year partnering with VCU on this program. We started out at Ettrick because that's our farthest elementary school, and we're challenged with finding teachers who are willing to make that travel. The outcomes have been excellent. The three teachers who are over there now teaching with our principal reports some really, really good results from it. This coming year, we actually will have 8 residents that are going to be spread out in our more high need schools. And we're really excited to see where that goes. In addition to the traditional program that Dr. Dare described, we also have a pathway for our instructional assistants to go into teaching. So some of our employees who have already shown that they have a great aptitude for working with kids and working with all kids, we are now able to get them endorsed as teachers and become full-time teachers in our division. So we're really excited about that partnership and looking forward to continuing to grow that.
Either of you can kind of respond, but are there parts of that program that you would like to improve upon, or are there gaps within that program that you would like to fill?
So one of the things that we've been addressing since last year, which I'm really excited about, is that in the program, one of the things that we do in the program that I think is successful, along with the preparation they get, is how we recruit folks. We recruit folks who want to be in urban high need schools, and I think that's important. Opposed to some student finishing and then maybe getting placed, wanting to be in a different school in the suburbs and then getting placed in an urban high need school. So students want to be in that school. One of the things I'm really excited about with the residency program and what they've done is they've really been leaders in our school in tackling the very issue of implicit bias and white superiority and white fragility, and brought in some speakers and really done some training in their programs, and are really leaning in more with that culturally responsive practice and pedagogy and those aspects. And I think they're really leading some of those efforts, and we're trying to do those efforts across the entire school of education. We get caught into some challenges and things like that, but we also have some other units, like we have an Office of Strategic Engagement that does work with professional development, but then we've also developed a program called the Innovative Teacher Pipeline, where within our traditional program, we've identified students who want to be in urban high need schools, and we provide them the culturally responsive practice pedagogy, deep reflection on implicit bias and white fragility, and interrogating whiteness and those type of deeper issues to really prepare them for success with all students. And our hope is that that will spread throughout the school. But I think that addition, I'm really excited to get feedback, from the division personnel, if they can see that shift within our students.
And for us, I think I'm going to call it the opportunity that it has highlighted, as because they have to be paired with a master teacher who is going to support their residency year. Well, that master teacher also has to be very social justice oriented. They have to be culturally responsive, and they have to make sure that they can meet those needs of our student teachers as they come in. And the opportunity we have is to make sure that our teachers are prepared to receive these students who are coming to really change the world. We have, for the most part, kind of activist students who are coming, and we need to make sure that our teachers that are welcoming them, they might be a master math teacher, but are you a master culturally responsive math teacher? And that's that gap that we have the opportunity to make sure that we fill, so that this program can really thrive in our division.
And Mrs. Wade, if you can, as you hear them talking about a program like this, where they're addressing the need and trying to get more teachers of color who are not only aware of the other societal issues and cultural issues, to get them in these schools, how does that make you feel as a parent when you hear that conversation happening about a program like this to get more teachers of color in schools?
It's exciting for me to hear because I know I'm working with our middle school, Elizabeth Davis, their principal and their staff's awesome about, hey, how do we bring some of these grassroots into our staff as we start having these cultural and conversations. Those are things we're trying to think now. How do we supplement those needs of teachers? Because we're preparing you with some things, but not all things. And it's that soft skill side. I work in corporate America. We do a lot of training and invest a lot into that, and we're still failing in some degrees. So how do we help our educators with that? I love to hear that these programs are happening. I love to hear it because it also means it's happening as conversations in your classrooms so that your students are hearing it, and then my kids are hearing it not just from me because they get tired of hearing it from me, but it's also nice to know that for kids who aren't hearing it at home, that they're hearing it somewhere. You mentioned it before, like you've got to have that positive impact whether you are a student of color or not. And so by a byproduct of what you guys are talking about is that my kids and other kids are hearing it even if they're not getting it at home, and that grows into better grown-ups, right? Like that's just where it starts as kids and they go into that pipeline of society.
And I believe it was Dr. Johnson. I believe you were talking about too, like what does that look like for the support of the teacher, right? So if you can, also Dr. Dare and Dr. White too, also, and you can also chime in if you want. What if a teacher leaves the profession, a teacher of color leaves the profession? What are some of the common things you are hearing as to why they left? Do they feel alone on the island? Is that something you hear often?
Well, I'm going to maybe punt this question a little bit to Dr. Huff in our HR to see what sort of feedback they receive.
Yeah, let's do that.
I think I'm relatively new to Chesterfield County Public Schools, but have been in this work in school HR for some time. And I think some common things that you hear is people feel, I mean, frequently school divisions don't have maybe the resources to have formal affinity groups like you might see in a corporation. And so when you have a large number of schools, people sometimes do indicate that they feel, isolated at a particular school. Sometimes people might move to an area that they're not as familiar with when they're recruited out of college, and then they might return to another area or to the area where they, attended college. So we sometimes see that. I think that mentoring programs can be important, and thinking about how could we structure mentoring programs to support teachers of color. Maybe, differentiating our mentoring programs could potentially be a support.
And while we're here, just in the human resources department, a lot of that hiring also, involved, I would imagine, to some degree. Talk about the struggles that the school district may face in hiring a diverse group of teachers as they come in.
Well, I think we have to look at we probably have three areas of focus. So one is, do we have enough candidates of color in our recruitment pools? And as Dr. Dare said, that's a challenge because we have fewer and fewer people in teacher preparation programs. And we have to look at, are those candidates then getting before principals for interviews? And then we have to look at implicit bias and are candidates who are being interviewed and have a license to teach being hired. And I think all of those are points that we have to attend to at the same time. Some of the things that we're trying to do is to look at timing, because we know that teachers of color are in high demand in every division, and we want to recruit. When we want to recruit people who are in high demand, we have to be first to market. So some people are surprised to know, because Chesterfield County Public Schools is one of the larger employers in the Richmond Metro, but we didn't have a dedicated recruiting function until last Thanksgiving. So we're very excited about starting that fledgling dedicated recruiting function. And one of the things that allowed us to do is to have some earlier events this year. And we did have some early hiring fairs in January and February, and we flipped the one in March virtually very quickly. And 20% of our hires from those fairs were teachers of color. Now, that's not a great percentage, but it's better than our current. So we're moving the needle in the right direction just by looking at timing. And timing is something that, we can all do because it doesn't cost a lot of money. We've just submitted a grant to the Virginia Department of Ed to fund praxis test fees for all provisionally licensed teachers of color who are working on their longer certification. The state offered a competitive grant after doing a study and determining that the praxis tests were one barrier to diversifying our teacher force. Of course, a lot of times people will say, you should attend job fairs at HBCUs, and we do that, but that's just not enough because you have many, many employers and a very small number of candidates graduating. And when you think about changing your percentages, if our goal is for our staff demographics to look more similar to our student demographics, we're going to have to take more assertive actions. We are planning to attend a diversity job fair at VCU in October with support from our equity office. And we've hired some candidates. We've done mock interview panels at Virginia State and been able to hire some candidates there. We attended some virtual job fairs this spring through Diversity and Equity in Education. So we know those are some things we're doing. There's a lot more we can do. We want to focus more on career switcher events so that we can attract people of color in the community who might have an interest in teaching. We know that 25% of teachers of color enter the field through an alternate route. So they're not going through a teacher prep program right after high school. And so that should be a strategy we take a look at, and we could offer events to explain how that licensure pipeline might look, and we could offer those potentially in conjunction with or advertising through community partners, making sure that NAACP, Virginia Hispanic Chamber, various sororities and fraternities have information about that event to ensure that we have diverse participation. I think with recruiting, we've got a lot of ideas and there are a lot of systemic issues, but we need a short game and a long game. We know that we need to work with our students who are in school. I mean, where do we have people with great potential to be teachers? I think we have them right here in Chesterfield County Public Schools in our K through 12 classrooms. So working more with our counselors, with Educators Rising programs, with programs in our schools to grow our own teacher workforce. I know a lot of success in various areas of the country has come from those efforts. I think that's something that we can do. But we also have to look at our short game, like our timing and alternative certification routes, because it's a systemic issue, but it's an urgent issue. I remember participating in an event similar to this one, and after the event, a parent of a 9th grade student came to talk to me after the event, and we were talking about all of these plans and all of these 5-year plans and our 8th graders and how we could follow them through college and increase our pool. And she was saying, she was talking about her son and all of the talents that her son had and her son's future, and her son was in 9th grade, and her son didn't have 8 years to wait to have a diverse teaching force. So I think it's really important that we simultaneously keep our eye on the short game and the long game.
If I can just add a little to that, we really echo that sentiment in terms of the short game and the long game. In academia and in higher ed, one of the challenges that we have is that, as researchers, you take time and you thoroughly look and investigate issues. And that's how we're trained. The challenge is whenever you have an issue with such urgency, we have to pivot, and especially when we have so much information on what the problems are, we have to pivot. I'm really excited that we started a minority educator recruitment and retention center. We started it last year. Dr. Laron Scott is the director of that center. And so we're working, we're still in that kind of ramp-up phase, but working with school divisions in terms of how we can support your minority teachers in terms of the retention, and also how can we bolster the recruitment of underrepresented minority educators. We're going to be developing a pipeline program this year. I hope it's going to get off the ground this year. We've had meetings with I believe it's the Teachers for Tomorrow representatives from the surrounding school divisions, and we hope to really create a pipeline program there, but also have a minority educator pipeline program that's set up with that. And also with our Office of Strategic Engagement, we're also providing professional development for our graduates for 2 years post-graduation who are in high-need schools. And within that office, it's focused on helping educators to be more successful with Black and brown students. So we're being very intentional about that. And we've also, in our second cohort of a career switcher program, and again, the focus on that is how are we intentionally preparing educators for success, in high need schools with Black and brown school children. And I'll also kind of speak for Dr. Willis Walter, who is a dean at Virginia State, that we share the same level of urgency and passion about this issue. And as state universities, we believe that we have that responsibility.
I did want to highlight something that Ms. Monroe said earlier as a possible reason why some of our teachers may not stay in the profession. Typically, when we get a teacher of color, we put them where we feel there's the highest need. And typically that's in a school that is higher need, or in a classroom that is higher need. So as far as professional growth, they don't get to teach those AP courses. They don't get to teach those higher level courses. And they don't get to be at some of our more affluent schools where they can see something a little bit different than what they're used to. And as rewarding as it is to teach at a high need school, it is also exhausting. And as humans, sometimes you just get tired. And I think that might be some of the things that I've heard as to why we do lose some of our teachers of color, because we do need to make sure that they have opportunities to be at all kinds of schools and in all kinds of classrooms.
Can I? Oh,
No, I'm sorry. I just want to say, a few of my educator friends, we've come to the consensus that a lot of times we are used as the enforcers in the school, always, and that is exhausting. So it would be great to have opportunities I don't want to be the mean teacher all the time. I don't want to come in and get everybody straight. Sometimes I want to be the consoler. I want to play good cop sometimes. So, that's at quite a few different schools and with different demographics, and not just a Title I. So that is very valid, what you're saying.
I just wanted to jump in just with a brief comment to Dr. White's response, because as a school counselor, I will share that I have had several colleagues just come in and they just need a minute to just lay on the sofa, and it's not instructional. So some of the reasons it's not instructional coaching or support. Some of it is really support for compassion fatigue, because it is real. And we have to recognize that. So my emotional support, my mental health support, sometimes and I'm just repeating some things that I may hear, sometimes I just need that break, right, is what is said. Or it's consistent day after day, and we're speaking about high needs schools, but just thinking that is the place, right, for teachers of color. That is the place. They're going to get in there. They're going to make a difference. And some teachers of color are drawn to that. They want to go to the communities where they feel that they would best served, because it is about a fit. And in many instances, that is a school that may be deemed hard to staff, right? But we also have to recognize that with that day in, and day out, and taking so much on, it goes beyond instructional coaching. How are you supporting me when I leave the building and I still have work? I have kids at home, I'm going home, I have dinner to make, I have my own children to tend to, but I can't even release. I'm driving in the car and I'm tense. I'm driving like this because, I'm tense. But I love what I do. I absolutely love what I do. And I'm there for the students. But at the same time, support me in all ways. Support me in all ways, not just a PD geared towards instruction, but allow me the time to collaborate in a sense where we speak about the compassion fatigue and what that looks like, and incorporating brain breaks throughout the day. There also needs to be intention behind that support as well.
And in this conversation, something just kind of jumped out at me. So a couple weeks ago, when we had students up here on the panel, a young lady who sat right there where you are, Bruce, she said, it's not enough for a student of color to just hear that the school district or the school is working towards hiring teachers of color. It's like, oh, we're working on it, working on it. But students feel like there's no transparency and where's the proof to show me that there is an active step by the school district to take steps to get more teachers of color in the building. If you can, I know there are people out there who have no idea what hiring a teacher looks like. Kind of walk us through that process a little bit and just kind of pick up on some of the things that can really speak to the transparency that I think parents and students are looking for when it comes to this issue.
Well, I think our hiring planning really needs to start in the fall for the following school year. We are, and again, this year we got our first recruiter at Thanksgiving. So recruiting now is not something that we just do on the side with everything else. And I think that'll be a help. But we need to come up with a plan, and so we have a plan of which colleges and universities, job fairs we're going to attend. We're looking on the NCES site about how diverse is the student population at that college or university. We're looking at geographic region, how likely are people there to come here. We're thinking about who are we sending to recruit. We need to make sure that we're sending some diverse staff members to campuses to recruit, because we want people to be able to see themselves here and to have dialogue with our staff members, and to feel supported to come here. We then need to do some events, I think, for career switchers as well, so that we're not just looking at traditionally trained candidates, but also candidates who already live in our community, people of color who might have an interest in going into teaching, and kind of demystify that process as far as, how can you get a provisional license, and what does that pathway look like, and that you can start teaching in a relatively quick period of time with some of these programs. We also are working with our instructional assistants, both through the RTR program and through additional Title II funding with cohort programs, to provide additional pathways to teaching so that there are many entry points. We're looking at having events earlier. We are tracking our success rate on every event. How many hires did we have from the event, and what were the demographics of our hires on every event? So those are things that we've started doing. It was a little challenging to have recruiting for 3 months and then a global pandemic, but we did take some steps this year, and we're in October. Once we're fully staffed for this year, we're also going to look at how do we do just this year with hiring? Do our percentages look different from our hires this year compared to our overall staff? Because that's part of what tells us if we're moving the needle or if we're not.
And let's go to Dr. Philman. You're over at Henning Elementary School, and you are really hands-on when it comes to hiring, and you're really in the trenches specifically. Why did you feel that need to be so closely connected to hiring, and what are some of the outcomes that you're seeing?
That's a great question, and one that I'm really passionate about. And I do think that, just before I start talking about some of the things that I've done and the hands-on approach and things that we've done at Henning, is that I think it goes to supporting the teachers. It goes back to what Dr. Johnson said about teachers have to feel valued, and our teachers of color have to feel valued. So it goes beyond just hiring teachers of color. We can do that all we want, but if they're not staying, then we have to look at ourselves. We have to have that self-reflection. We have to look at what is the perception, because I tell my staff this all the time, that perception is reality. And so I do think, in the past, and I love Chesterfield County, and my kids go to school, both my kids go to school in Chesterfield County, but I do think that Chesterfield County does not have a good perception of out there with hiring teachers of color. And so we have to find a way to show them that this is a place that they're valued, that this is a place where, we respect and honor what you bring to the profession and what you do for our children. And so at Henning, we've really done a lot of work on that. We've spent over 2 years just really doing the work of the interpersonal work, the understanding ourselves, because I think you have to do that before you do the work of understanding others. And so as a staff, we've done some deep dives, and I'm really excited that we're doing this, because this is exactly what we need to do. We need to hold the conversation. We do some deep dives into what are our beliefs, what are our biases, what are our prejudices, so that we're creating an environment, a school environment that is inclusive and that does value the teachers of color that we hire. Because word of mouth spreads. Teachers talk. People talk. We've been able to, I believe, increase our teachers of color at Henning because we are inclusive. And then, those teachers talk to their friends that teach in other districts. And then they talk, or their college, their peers that were in colleges are going through their prep programs. And they understand that Henning is an inclusive place, and it is a place that values all teachers, but definitely values teachers of color. And we've seen our staff grow at least 400% in our teachers of color. We had under a handful 5 years ago, and now we're well into double digits. And it's exciting to see and exciting to have the conversation. But we continually have these conversations in small, safe group. We do what we call huddles. And we pose questions. They do it twice a week. And they have to have these conversations. No one's voice can be quiet. And we learn how to have that discourse and how to talk with one another and how to address those microaggressions that occur. In those small groups, you can call each other out on that. I don't like when you do this, or do you know what that means? A good example of that is, 2 years ago, we were talking about, I love all kids. I don't care what color they are. I don't see color. Well, that's wrong. And to a white person, you might not think about that because you don't have to think about color every day. But to a person of color, they live it every single day, and they have to address that. And so when you say, I don't see color, you don't see that person. And so you have to create an environment where that's understood and that's valued. So that's what has to happen before you even start just looking at how do you recruit and what are our practices and how do we hire. We have to create that environment that's safe and create that environment that truly values having teachers of color. And I'm very proud of the work we're doing. We've done a lot of work on that interpersonal work, and now we're moving into understanding others. One of my worries about all of this that's come out of this racial discourse that's occurring in society now is that there's going to be that desire for a quick fix, that desire just to hire more teachers of color. And it's bigger than that. If we just do that, we're going to get stuck in the cycle that we were talking about before. We've been here before. We've been better before. Dr. Dyer talked about, we're more segregated now than we were 40 years ago. We've been better before. but we allowed it to slip. So we have to build those systems that allow us to continue the conversation and to continue to value each other. And so I think it starts there, and we've done a lot of that work. But then you have to get the word out that you are a place that values teachers of color and great educators. And, you know, to do that, sometimes you just have to get on social media. And you have to encourage the teachers you have to reach out to their friends and to their colleagues and to people that they know. And we've done a lot of that, and to encourage them to apply. You know, we've gotten a lot of our teachers at Henning through those loose networks of, I went to college with this person, or I taught in another school down in Norfolk with this person. And we've been able to say, you know, this is a place you want to come. This is a place where we're gonna value you and listen. But then I think it's about the conversation too. To identify this and how I got to this, where I am now, and I have a long way to go still, is that I've listened to teachers, not just teachers of color, but white teachers as well. You know, where are you in your understandings of this? And that's allowed me to hopefully guide my staff into being able to have those conversations with one another, and then ultimately get down to what we're all there to do, which is to teach the kids. So it's a loaded question. There's a lot there. But that's how we've gone about it at Henning, and I think that I think the proof is there, you know, that we are doing a good job at that, and hopefully my teachers would say that they do feel valued and that they do like coming to work every day and working at a school that has these conversations. But it's tough, and it requires a lot of work, and it requires not to be defensive. It requires that you reflect upon yourself, and it requires that when someone says something that stings, you know, that you reflect upon yourself, and you know what, maybe that's right. You know, maybe there's something behind that. And it's exciting that Chesterfield County as a whole is having these conversations and doing more recruiting and doing more of that, because I do think that we can change that perception. And I do think that our community and our students are going to succeed because of that and benefit because of that.
Dr. Philman's comments made me think about something that oftentimes is not discussed or under-discussed in these conversations about teacher recruitment and retention, but it's about making sure that we have principals that think, talk, and process the way that you do. So we have to really look at principal, you know, administrator preparation, because when you have a school leader, and there were some things that you said that are just key things that you said, is we need more principals like Dr. Philman. So we have to, that's a conversation that we need to make sure we keep on the table.
But as I got my PhD at VCU,
I was praying you're going to say
No, and I think that's reassuring too. There was a principal last time, I believe he was from Thomas Dale High School, spoke directly the same way you eloquently put that is the same way he did. And speaking as a man of color, a black man, that is inviting to hear. You know, that is inviting, because you talk about racial, there's got to be some racial stamina involved, right? You're going to have conversations that sting, but you got to have some stamina to withstand, because from the African American community, there's a certain level of fatigue there, because you have been living that for so long. So there's got to be some type of middle ground where the conversation is healthy, but it's also got to be prosperous, right? So you hear someone like that leading a building, I can see how that can be super beneficial to the kids, the parents, the teachers. So that is amazing to hear.
Do you mind if
Yeah, you go. Yeah, listen. I'm sorry. I sometimes I go on a tangent. I just sometimes you talk.
No, I just wanted to jump in because that, you know, was a great point that you all made. And Dr. Dare and Dr. Philman, you all speaking to that as well. And so you are at Henning, and Ms. Wade, I know you spoke to Davis, and I sat in on the last community forum that Mr. Strittmatter held, and he was very transparent in his conversation of, you know, we've hired X amount of teachers, and this many were teachers of color. And so, and you also spoke to Dr. Jones at Thomas Dale. And so while you were speaking, all that kept playing in my mind was, how do we make sure that this intention, and again, we're in Chesterfield, so I'm speaking to this county, but it's applicable everywhere. How do we make sure that that intention is there across the board, right? So across schools, across leadership teams and admin teams, across our teachers, and felt by all of our students. And so to hear you speak, I keep thinking like, wow, listen to that passion and that, intention behind everything that he is saying, right? But there are also students, families, community members who may not feel that there is intention there and where they are. And so how do we make sure that that is felt across? It's just something that came in my mind, but how do we make sure that that is felt just, across, where that intention is everywhere, along the lines of what you spoke about. And I'm going back to a question. You always think of something after you answer, right? Like, I should have said this, but also, Miss Monroe, I think we were piggybacking off of one another. When we speak about interactions between students and teachers, and we spoke about compassion fatigue, we have to hold ourselves accountable as well. And we cannot just say, this is a student of color that is having something going on right now. They need support from a teacher of color. And I say that because in some instances, okay, maybe they may have a relationship with this particular teacher of color, but students need relationships and they need compassion. And so I would, challenge, or not necessarily challenge, but have a conversation with, my white colleagues and say, that student does not just have to come into my office because they are black or student of color and, I am a staff member of color. You get to know that student, right? And you get to know their experiences for yourself. And you get to know that student for yourselves, and you all connect. It cannot just be, this is the black administrator on the team, or this is the black teacher on the 7th grade team. And so, if there's a problem, that's just where it funnels. And again, it happens that way sometimes because of relationships where there's just a natural connection. But it can't just be the intention behind connecting just because of that. We have to also challenge, I keep saying the word challenge, but have a conversation with our colleagues to say, you get to know that student for yourself. Yes, you're not a teacher of color, but you pull that student in and you all talk and you connect, because sometimes that contributes to the fatigue and the burnout, or even, the stress behind that sometimes, behind what we do.
What I wanted to add definitely to the conversation around intention, but also adding the lack of making excuses for why we don't. And I wanted to bring that up because I've had the honor of working with Dr. Philman this past year. And one of the conversations I had with him was, well, we looked around, we didn't have any black teachers, and we heard that there weren't any out there. He said, but I looked down the street at Broad Rock Elementary, which is literally, 2 miles from you? They have black teachers there. So where did they get their black teachers? And then he went on a quest to really figure out what was it in his system that he needed to fix or to talk about, to have those conversations so that he could flip that. And that's how he got that 400% increase. By really looking at, because we hear things, oh, they're not out there, they're not there, they're not this, they're not that. But he really intentionally went to say, hey, is this really true? And then found that counterexample, or in improvement science, we call it the positive deviant. And now he is the positive deviant in our division. And it's really about not making those excuses, but having that intention behind the work. So, and, to also Dr. Johnson's point, we have, my child has gone through, graduated from Chesterfield a year ago. And in his journey, we got into Chesterfield when he was in 1st grade. He had one black teacher the whole time that he was in the school system. However, he had many teachers who were very supportive of him. He had teachers who nurtured him. They had teachers who gave him an excellent experience. So I don't want anyone coming off from this saying that a white teacher can't make a difference in a black child, you know. But we also know that I know that there are things that he missed out on because he didn't have that experience with teachers of color other than his mother, you know. So
Dr. White, I'm really glad you said that because, and the intention of our white teachers is all good. And we have this reaction sometimes when we hear that we've done something wrong, especially our really good teachers, to feel defensive because now you're telling me this great teacher who does everything to go above and beyond, I've been doing something wrong for 3, 5, 10, 15 years, and it's not that you're doing something wrong, you just didn't know. And it's having an environment where you can have those conversations. I think that's really important. I do think, our white teachers do a great job and can do a great job teaching all of them, everyone. But it is just reflecting. It's that self-reflection and not being afraid to correct your course. And Dr. Johnson, I loved what you had said about how do our parents know? And I think that's what I was referencing before about if you don't do the work with that interpersonal work first, and that can take some time, before you go to others, you're not ready for that. And that's where we partner with VCIC, which is the Virginia Center of Inclusive Communities. They're a great partner, but really they've been our guide. That's the person I can go to have those conversations of how do we meet the teachers where they are? How do we address this? How do we address that? And we had just decided the end of last year that our next step was now going to the community. And we are doing this now with our parents. And we have a small parent focus group that is forming and that we've been collecting since about March, maybe a little bit before that. That's now going to go through that training that we went through with parents. And then we're going to look at our events and really just going to the parents of what do we need to know about, our community so that we can participate in that. So that's kind of the next step for us. But I do think that's important because we do a lot in the building that parents never see.
We got about 2 more questions here, and this one is for you, Dr. Johnson. We kind of touched on it a little bit, but it says, what about retention? Does the fact that our workforce is not very diverse impact retention overall? And can you also speak to the role that induction and mentoring programs also play?
Wow, and so that is a great question. I think a lot of us have unpacked that, in all of our speaking points. So I'm trying to think of the best things to add. And what comes to mind is know me, grow me, coach me, support me, value me, right? Because it's one thing to get someone in the building or, to the table. It's one thing to recruit, right? As we have spoken about. But it is another thing to retain. They're completely different. So again, it comes to mind, know me, coach me, support me, grow me, grab a hold of me. And in speaking about mentoring programs, and I think Dr. White and Ms. Monroe, I think you all spoke to this, we have to be intentional about mentoring and pairing. Teachers, all staff members, but for the sake of this conversation, teachers. And so when we speak about mentoring, and I think I mentioned this earlier, I would like to use the word coaching, right? Coaching or modeling, because and I'm speaking for myself, but I don't need the type of mentoring to just hope you're having a great day. And I think I shared that earlier, but it's great. I want you to check on me and say, I hope you are having a great day. But I also want there to be intentional time for collaboration. I also want there to be, or teachers deserve intentional time for feedback outside of a formal observation. And so when we're thinking about recruitment and retention, and I think Dr. Huff, you spoke to the hiring committee and implicit bias. I think it was you, and I'm so glad that you hit on that because it is vital for our hiring panel and those that are at the table, and the person being interviewed is facing them, the hiring panel also needs to face their implicit bias as well. Because when they are looking at the person being interviewed and listening, they need to make sure that they are really listening for intention, engagement in the work, strengths, and the contributions that are going to be made, and not just coming to the table with, okay, you already look, a certain way, or what have you. It's critical to face and to recognize that we all have implicit bias, all of us, and it's vital for us to unpack that. So I think that is the best thing that I can add to that. And again, being valued. Everyone wants to feel empowered. So now, am I here as a teacher of color so you can say that I am here? And so you can say we've added 3 more, we've added 5 more, we've added 7 more. Is that why I'm here? Or am I here because you truly value what I bring to the profession? You truly value what I bring to the school community or to the division? Because teachers of color, and all teachers, but teachers of color impact in significant ways the culture of a building, of the division, of teams, right? So how am I valued? Because diversity does not mean inclusion. And so you can say we have a diverse what have you, or we have people from, X, Y, and Z backgrounds, or we have, teachers of color and white teachers, it's a diverse group. Okay, but are the ideas of the collected group valued? Or is it just the ideas of one part? Are we, we have a diverse group, but are we drawing a circle within that group around, around people? So again, I know we have spoken so much about it, but know me for who I am as a professional and what I could bring. Know my strengths, right? Grow me, so coach me, and be intentional with that. Be intentional with mentoring and coaching. Support me. Hear me with what I need. So if I bring something to you, please don't let it just be, then, I'm not passionate, or I don't care. Hear me, right? And value me. Bring me to the table, but also listen to what I have to say and be intentional about listening and what I bring.
I just want to highlight that grow me piece, because one thing that Dr. Philman said was we need good teachers. And in order for us to have, it's not enough to show up and be a black teacher. You need to be a good black teacher. And you don't just become that. They don't just come that way because they're black. They come that way because they're grown and they're given the opportunity to thrive and are given that opportunity to be coached and really grow into master teaching.
The only thing I'll say as a parent listening to this, it's the culture of your building and in your schools, right? And so this same culture that I hear this passion around during this conversation, our kids are picking up on it. And those same things that you're expressing that we want for each other as grown-ups, we want for our kids. And if you guys are getting that, our kids are getting it. And whether they're getting it at home or not, that's tremendous. And because they spend a lot of time with their teachers. So as a parent, I can appreciate that culture. We can tell it from our conversations with our kids. We can tell it when we have to walk into your buildings, whether it's for parent-teacher conferences or whatnot. And it makes a difference, and we can tell. So thank you for those schools that have that kind of culture and environment. And for those that don't, I hope that they are listening and hearing and are inspired to grow that there.
And I think we had another question from Ms. Wade. I'm just going to jump in and piggyback, because some things that I do say is it a coaching, professional development, or professional learning issue, or is it a passion issue, right? And this is for educators across the board, or teachers across the board, not just teachers of color. So am I passionate and committed about the students who are before me, the community that I serve, the school that I serve? Am I passionate about all who I serve, right? Because professional learning, coaching, mentoring, whatever we are going to call it, is not going to make a difference if it is a passion issue, right? Because we can't coach. I can tell you to love your kids and what you do, but I can't coach you on your internal motivation and passion. So is it a professional development or professional learning issue, or is it a passion issue? Is it a heart issue? Exactly. And that's some things that we also have to be accountable for. We have to be accountable for that, right? Because just because I'm placed here doesn't mean I'm passionate about it. And so are we, because you spoke about organizational structure, do we have components of this organization who are just going through the movement? Or are all the components invested? And, I'm a cougar, I'm Carver, but our slogan was all in. Are we all in?
I like to kind of open it up to some final thoughts. I think like we have these questions that we come in and we're conversing and everything is going well, but I think I don't want to lose sight of the people that are at home that are watching, the parents and potentially even students out there. I think so. I want to open it up for any final thoughts. If there's something that you can say to a parent that's watching, a student that's watching, or you can offer them any little nugget of hope about what's to come or where you see the school district going. I just want to open up and just kind of provide a couple of seconds for each of you to kind of offer a final thought as we wrap things up here tonight. Dr. Philman, would you like to go first?
Sure, on the spot. I think just going back to what I said before, the fact that we're sitting here having this conversation now, the fact that we're bringing students, teachers, parents, administrators, central office in to just have this conversation, and not only have this conversation, but have this live and have this out there for the world to see, that's exciting. And that hopefully shows our parents and our students that we're serious about this. Once it's out there on the internet, it's real. You're held accountable. It's there. So I would just say to parents and students, you're hearing this conversation, but hold us accountable. I tell my teachers all the time to call me out if I'm wrong, of course, in a professional way, but call me out. I don't want to be wrong. So I'm excited about this.
A few things. I'll try to limit it to three. Three brief things. Everything that's happening right now appears to be in response to issues with George Floyd and just the recent issues. And these are just the recent incidences of 401 years of issues. And I do hope that this is not a moment and that this is really a transformational movement. I hope these conversations continue, and that I hope people are having these courageous conversations in their home, because I think we're all victims, and we're all to some extent victims of kind of the racism and white superiority that this country was founded on, right? We all inhale that smog. There's some people who consciously breathe it in, but for most of us, we don't. We're not provided accurate history in schools. We're not taught to critically reflect on this, and I hope this continues, because it's an equity issue. It's just the right thing, and it's a humane thing, and it's a productivity thing for our country. We don't talk about that aspect that more. We cannot afford to lose the amount of people we're losing. We just can't afford it as a country, and it's also just not humane. So I just hope these conversations continues and continue, and that it's truly a transformational movement for all of us.
I think that, we all have bias. We can't get rid of our bias, but we have best practices that we can implement. We can use hiring panels. We can make sure that our panels are diverse. We can reflect on job qualifications and the discussions that we're having regarding candidates. We can engage in additional professional learning and self-development. We have a lot of opportunities in Chesterfield County, and we're going to need partners. We're going to need thought partners. We're going to need our higher ed partners. We're going to need our community partners. We're going to need parent partners. We're going to need referrals. For vacancies, we're going to need a long game and a short game. And I think it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. But there's also a sense of urgency, and we can't lose sight of that sense of urgency, and we can't lose sight of our purpose because the well-being and success of our students depend on it.
And so my final thoughts go along with Dr. Dare's. And this needs to be, so this platform, these conversations need to be continually woven into our fabric. This needs to be a part of our fabric and a part of our systems that outlast any of us. So it shouldn't just be, as long as the people who are in place now are in their positions that this conversation is happening, right? It should be organically fused with us as who we are as an educational system to continue and as part of our system that outlasts any of us. So what I would say is to keep the conversation going. Please continue this and to uplift the voices of everyone.
I am a product of Chesterfield County Public Schools. I have children in the school system, and as we know, I also teach here, but I wanted to piggyback off of you, Dr. Dare. These conversations do need to continue. When I was a student, a lot of the choices I made were a direct reflection and in direct correlation to not having teachers who look like me. Didn't want to be in AP courses anymore because I didn't value the curriculum. I stopped playing high school sports because I didn't feel valued as a student or as a student athlete. I'm very glad that this conversation is being had. It's very significant and important. And as an educator who works with a lot of minority students, I really appreciate it. And I appreciate the honesty. So again, I just want to say thank you because I appreciate it wholeheartedly.
As a parent and hearing everything I've heard, yes, I definitely have a vote in for this. It's a continuous journey, and we've got to keep the conversations in our schools, in our homes, in our communities. I would say as a parent, the thing that I've enjoyed the most always, but especially in the last few months, is just engagement. So making sure we are engaging with you at our schools, with our students, understanding how we can contribute to the conversation, and engaging in a way that I use at home and I use at work, in a way that we're being curious and kind, both with each other and with ourselves, because this is going to be a long journey, and it's going to take everyone, whether you're a child or an adult or an educator. Where you mentioned it earlier, all in, right? It's going to take the village.
So just earlier, Dr. Philman said, you don't fear what you know. And I think a lot of what we see right now is based in fear. A lot of what we hear is based in fear, whether it's in fear what's going to happen to me as a black person or what's going to happen to the 3 black men who live in my house if they choose to go do something, or the fear of Amy Cooper seeing a black man in the park and saying, you know what, this is if I say this, they're going to come and get him because other people fear him as well. So also, if I may plug, as a VCU graduate, that's where I got my master's, sir, we are charged to be critically reflective practitioners, meaning that we're always examining our practice. We're always looking at the things that we do so that we can get better. In Chesterfield County, we have promised our community that we are going to create a better tomorrow. That tomorrow is not some far off tomorrow that we're not going to be alive to see. That tomorrow is literally, today's Wednesday, tomorrow is Thursday. What are we going to learn from what happened today so that Thursday can be better, so that Friday can be better, so that Monday can be better? And if we, as a learning organization, what we can commit to is taking that learner stance so that we can learn about each other, about this work, about what we're doing, so that we can start to allay those fears because we will know better. We will know each other better. And these conversations, I think, do a great job of contributing to that knowledge of each other, the knowledge of the system, and the knowledge of what's happening so that we can create that better tomorrow.
That is a perfect place to end for the night. Thank you all so much for offering your time, your expertise, and your insight. I hope everyone at home on social media has walked away from this conversation with some insight into certainly what's happening with CCPS as far as hiring, but also identifying the people that are in some of these buildings working with your children for a brighter tomorrow, like Dr. White spoke of. So thank you so much once again. If you want to be a teacher, I believe Kim Huff is the person you need to contact. So get in contact with her. Thank you guys so much for joining us, and have a great night.